know that politics have always been a hot topic in the world of media. Growing up, we have seen events televised like presidential debates. The first political debate I watched was in 2008. The first ever televised political debate was between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. This is the debate that inspired Daniel Boorstin to write his book, The Image. Boorstin created an entire book that focused on a variety of topics, but mainly focused on events called pseudo events. Pseudo events can be defined as events that are non-spontaneous events, or events that are planned out. Events that are planted for the purpose of being reported and reproduced. Events that have a relation to the situation that is ambiguous, and events that are typically intended for self-fulfilling prophecy. So, in other words, the event is being created rather than simply reported. Boorstin states that in the last century, a larger and larger proportion of our experiences are pseudo events. In an article I read online, it stated that Boorstin understood long before it was a topic that fake news could be used in the future to shape elections. And the article stated that Boorstin understood that other news sources would come about and we would question if it's actual news source. So, Twitter. And we're to be taking these events that Boorstin talked about in his book The Image and relating them to two other texts. Those texts being Unbelievable by Katie Tur and Like War by P.W. Singer and Emerson T. Brooking. Let's talk about Katie Tur. First of all, Katie Tur was covering Donald Trump's campaign for NBC and MSNBC. In this book, she discusses her own experiences on the campaign trail when working with Donald Trump. A lot of the events that Katie Tur talks about, in my opinion, were examples of pseudo events. For example, one in particular stood out to me because it involves where I live. Tur talks about how Trump goes to Michigan on the eve of election night. She states that the only reason that Trump was there was because he needed a miracle. She even states that Trump would have ended the campaign hours before in Manchester instead of Michigan. Trump needed publicity in Michigan. He needed a story in Michigan. He needed more voters to see him, so he planned to go to Michigan so that way the news would be on him. He created a pseudo event essentially by going to Michigan. Although there are other examples I found in the text, this was the one that was most drawing to me because it made me wonder, how did this affect the voters' opinion in Michigan after his trip to Michigan? Michigan voted Democratic for 6 elections in a row before this election. Donald Trump narrowly flipped the state in 2016, defeating Hillary Clinton by just 0.2%. This was the closest state by popular vote percentage in 2016. Trump visiting Michigan on the eve of the election may or may not have flipped the voter opinion in his favor, but nonetheless, he won Michigan, and Trump going to Michigan on the eve of election night was a good example of a pseudo event. We're now going to move on to Like War by Emerson T. Brooking and P.W. Singer. We know that Daniel Boorstin predicted the coming of fake news, and we know that tweets are still a hot topic of debate of if they are news or not, but I would like to address how I feel as though Trump's tweets are an example of pseudo events. They are created by Trump himself to create news, and Trump has tweeted about threatening nations and serious other things, and after he does that, U.S. diplomats and foreign embassies alike scramble to figure out whether or not they should take these online messages seriously. I believe since Trump is sending this information out there and essentially creating news, that these are examples of what Boorstin was talking about in his book, The Image. Relating back to Katie Tur, well, she firsthand saw how Trump was capable of creating pseudo events. In conclusion, all three of these texts for one relate because they talk about politics. Daniel Boorstin talks about pseudo events, and his inspiration for his book was fired by watching the first ever televised political debate. And Katie Tur opens our eyes in her book, whether she meant to or not, to pseudo events that she covered and wrote about. And lastly, Like War opens our eyes to how these pseudo events can be put online and discussed, whether to take the news that Trump was tweeting seriously or not. Politics are one of the most widely talked about topics in the media. Keep your eyes open for pseudo events in the news from now on.